3.
Hi, I'm Valerie. Could you state, it's to meet you too. Could you state for the camera your full name and your area of expertise, like what you're certified in?
I'm Peter Beck. I teach environmental science and policy.
Okay, very interesting. And today we're going to be talking about climate change. What is climate change?
Climate change is the gradual increase in the temperature of the Earth as a whole, especially over the last 150 years.
Is there anything that could have caused, in the last 150 years, a spike in temperature?
Well, there's a strong correlation. We see the increase at about the same time that industrialization started. And so the main human-induced cause is burning of fossil fuels, which of course came or increased tremendously with the industrial era.
Okay.
Burning of coal and petroleum products.
So are you saying it seems that the direct cause for an increased climate is primarily due to human activities?
Yes, not entirely, but primarily, and there's general scientific consensus on that now.
Is there consensus on that within the U.S.?
Well, there is among scientists on the U.S., not 100%, but there's general scientific consensus if you read the scientific journals. If you watch TV or listen to talk radio or something, you get a very different perspective, but that's generally not coming from the scientists, and they're generally not quoting the science.
In your personal opinion, do you think that that is probably due to big business in America? That we have kind of a schism between like what the scientific community thinks and then what, for example, like a media outlet sponsored by GM or some kind of big company is portraying for us?
Yeah, it might be. I mean, the coal industry and oil industry funded a lot of these skeptics groups, especially in the 90s to the early 2000s. I mean, we know that. They were funded by the fossil fuel industry, and they would promote, research and promote talking heads or people to go on these talking head shows and denounce it. A lot of it also is the general, usually people don't read scientific journals. They read Time magazine or they watch the news on TV or something, so that they don't, that's not where we get our information from. Kind of just the louder you talk and the more outrageous the claims, the more airtime you get. Scientists don't make good cover, or they don't make good TV personalities. They're boring and dry. And they talk with a lot of qualifications. Instead of saying, this is absolutely happening, they say, well, given these circumstances, this might occur, and that doesn't make for good copy.
So do you think we need more Bill Nye scientists out there, kind of riling people up?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the. I mean, there's a debate among scientists. I mean, a lot of them traditionally the idea is you shouldn't be an advocate because that's compromising your science, but a lot of climatologists specifically now are looking at that, and just a few weeks ago they made a pronouncement saying we are going to try and advocate more, because just doing the science and publishing the results, it's not getting out there.
Definitely. Do you feel that, globally, where do you feel that the U.S. ranks in, I guess, trying to initialize some kind of way to combat this, like, so as to decrease our impact globally on an increased climate?
Well, globally, the U.S. is not playing a lead role. In fact, the U.S. is one of the few countries, I mean, really almost the only country that has not ratified the Kyoto Protocol, which is the international treaty dealing with climate change. Where we can play a major role is in development of new technologies. That would be, of course, we would go a lot further with that if we had increased funding for those things, and if we started to subsidize that area as opposed to fossil fuel, we'd see a lot more development pretty quickly.
Today in lecture you were mentioning that we refuse Kyoto program, where it was to decrease our carbon emissions by 7% by 2012.
Right.
Since we didn't ratify that, we didn't take part in that, have we done anything to try to combat that? And where do, as a percentage, I guess if you have to slap a number on it, where are we at?
Yeah, our increase in CO2 emissions has slowed down, and it's largely, and at the same time that our economy, generally since the 90s, our economy was growing steadily, and then in the 2000s it's kind of gone up and down a little bit. But our economy has definitely grown from the time that Kyoto was negotiated, and we're getting more economic output per unit of carbon emitted. On the other hand, our carbon emissions have continued to increase. So if you see Kyoto's specified 7% reductions of 1990 levels, but we've continued to increase since Kyoto was negotiated. So now we're something like 20% above 1990 levels. So now if we're trying to even get to Kyoto, which was really seen as a first step, it wasn't seen to be, we really have to cut by probably 20%.
So rather than taking a baby step at the time it was offered, we're going to have to make a great leap at some point.
Right, and the more we delay
if at all,
the harder it's going to be. If we would have started then, like a lot of European countries did, and not all European countries have made their Kyoto targets, but a lot of them have, and because it was a lot easier to do it, to actually reduce by 5 to 7%, and then build on that, and to just wait and keep increasing, then have to make the big cut later.
You were mentioning, just like in terms of the economy, do you believe that we can achieve like development in our economy and then at the same time remain sustainable as far as like our emissions are and everything, pollutants that we expel into the environment? Or do you think that we have to choose one or the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the goal is that we could have both. If we just do things in a different way, then we can have both. We can keep, high levels of living while doing it in a sustainable way. I mean, I think we need to shoot for both. We can make, in the U.S., we're such we waste so much, because we live in huge homes and we drive big trucks, and we get new electronics every 6 months and things like that. I mean, we could maintain a very high level standard of living while using a lot less energy, first of all. Then if we change the component of that energy and get it from renewable sources, we're going to reduce our impact even more. And so there's a lot we can do without reducing our standard of living at all. Now, if we want to really make, cut back even further, then we might have to do some, behavioral changes, not traveling as much, or, moving to a smaller house or something like that. But the first steps, there's a tremendous amount we can do that wouldn't, cause any suffering at all. We just have to do things differently.
For students, just at St. Ed's, and I guess just anyone of a younger generation such as ourselves, what can we do to kind of combat the problems that we're faced with now?
Well, one thing you can do is become politically active. You can do things on your own. You can organize on campus to change the way the university does things. There's a group of students that's really trying to get the university to reduce their emissions, and they've had a lot of success. And you can, do things on your own and get your friends to do things on your own. To have a really big impact, you need to influence your elected officials. And so we just had an election where these issues didn't play much of a role at all. And so if, people would actually, say that, hey, this is something that's important. We want our elected officials to act on it. I'm going to vote on this. Then, they would have to respond. Whether they're getting funding from big business or not, they would respond.
And our little changes that we make in our everyday lives, such as opting to carpool or take a bus, mass transit systems rather than an individual car, do you think that there's any way that those can, if people make the movement towards that rather than like I was saying, mass transit rather than the self, is there any way that we could make an impact on that?
Yeah, and of course that depends on how many people do that. And the more people that do it, the greater the impact will be. And one thing that we can do is we have some kind of concerted public action that would make that more feasible. So for instance, if you're in a city like New York or Boston or Washington, it's very easy not to have a car and just use public transit, and it's actually probably faster and easier than driving anyway, and cheaper. When you're in Austin, you know that's not true. If you try to take the bus, depending on where you live, it can take you 2-3 times as longer or more to get where you're going. It's very inconvenient. So if you really want a lot of people to do that, you need some kind of policy that puts into place, that coordinates where people live and where they work, and mass transit. Like, we have one light rail line now. For a lot of people to use it, we really need a lot more than that. But there's a lot individuals can do, but there's a limit to what an individual can do. We need to get policy going that would support it, that would make it convenient for individuals to do what they could.
In your opinion, do you think that our generation could create this kind of reform movement, or do you think that it's unlikely that people in today's American society will kind of carry out this radical change in order to combat these growing problems faced just for our environment?
Yeah, I think it's very likely. I mean, I think people in your generation is the generation that will have to do something about it. And it's very likely that you will. It's very likely, and if we're talking about climate change, it's very likely that you will have to do it, like in 20 years or something like that. Not just with climate change, but you will have to be a lot less dependent on fossil fuels and oil just due to declining supplies. And that's going to happen, in the next several decades. So you will have to do something, and I think you will. And the question is just, usually it's easier if you can plan in advance before it becomes a crisis to act.